thanks for coming. It's great to see so many people here on this beautiful August night. So thanks for coming. The Joslyn will reopen 5 weeks from today. And we are as excited as you are to have our doors open again. So there's going to be a lot to see when you come to the Joslyn. The new Rhonda and Howard Hawks Pavilion, revealing the Phil Schrager collection, upgrades and renovations to the beloved 1931 and 1994 buildings, a reimagined point of entry, new acquisitions galore. And in order to kind of learn and sort of help set the scene for that reopening a few weeks away, we're going to hear from Craig Dykers, Aaron Dorf, and Michelle Delk. These three individuals have been deeply connected to this project for over 6 years. It's hard to imagine. And what we're going to do, I think of life as an outline. We're going to start like a funnel. We're going to be big picture and then kind of zero into some smaller details and then expand out at the end. We're going to take about 45 to 50 minutes and then have about 10 minutes for questions. But before we start, I thought I would have each of these brilliant panelists introduce themselves in about 30 seconds. We'll start with Craig, and we'll let Craig have a few extra seconds so he can talk about the origin of the firm Snøhetta, and then we'll start. And I'm Jack Becker, Executive Director of the Joslyn, by the way.
Thank you, Jack. And maybe we can go to picture number 2. We have a DJ back there who's running the pictures. So I'm Craig Dykers. I'm an architect, and I'm also the founder of a company called Snøhetta. Snøhetta is a weird word. It's less strange if you know this mountain. So the mountain that's shown on the screen is the mountain that we're named after. It's in central Norway, a rather beautiful place, and also has an interesting relationship to culture and history. So it's always been important to us. But most importantly, the mountain is a work of landscape, and we're also architects. So it's a place where architecture and landscape come together. And we began the company back in 1989 when we won a commission to make the new Alexandria Library in Egypt. Not the one in Virginia, but the one in Egypt. And we've been working ever since then until we reached this crescendo, which is to make the new Joslyn Museum expansion. So thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Delk. I'm also a partner at Snøhetta. I'm a landscape architect. And I joined the firm a little bit after Craig started it. I joined about 11 years ago. And I have had the opportunity to work, of course, as Jack said, here on the Joslyn expansion and to really think about, we'll talk about this later, where to put the building and also how to think about the grounds. But I also love sharing, especially here in Omaha, that I'm a Midwesterner at heart and grew up in northern Iowa. So part of this feels not exactly, but a little bit like coming home. So it's been so wonderful to spend time here and to meet people and get to know you all.
I'm Aaron Dorf. I'm a director and architect at Snøhetta. I've been with Snøhetta since 2007, so we're getting close to my 18th year, probably in about a month. So not that I'm counting. So I've had the good fortune to work on a lot of really amazing projects in New York and San Francisco, places beyond. But this has been a fantastic experience, and I do mean that from day one. I mean, the very first visit that we made as a part of this project was somehow just unexpectedly just magical. You know, I didn't know a lot about Omaha. Got off the plane and went straight to the museum, and it was just kind of like jaw-dropping. You know, the buildings, the site that you had before was fantastic, and our job was really just don't mess it up. So, I hope you feel that way when you go there.
Great. Well, thank you all for those introductions, and let's just start at the very beginning. So, in the very beginning, before you put pencil to paper, before you created this beautiful design that we'll all know to come and love, how did you gather input about the institution, its needs, Omaha, the collections? I mean, what's the thought process at the very beginning when you stepped back 6+ years ago? And we can start with you, Craig.
I suppose I'll start. I had actually been to Omaha many times during my life, and the first time I came here was perhaps in the early 1980s. And I had visited the Joslyn, was high on the list of things to do when I came here. I studied the building in architecture school. It's a very important building. And when I arrived, I saw this magnificent structure. It was before the Scott Pavilion was built, just kind of lifted up out of the terrain. And I talked to a lot of people. I knew people in Omaha. And they told me how meaningful that building was to them. Many people had had their high school graduations there. So there was this feeling that it was more than a museum. It was much larger than an art institution. It was a cultural institution. And so I talked to a lot of people at that time. And then when I came back, I was actually asked to lecture at the building. And when I returned, I met many architects. And I met many people in the community, and they all told me, as Aaron said, how important it was to them. Don't mess it up. Many people had taken their first dates there, in addition to graduating, or felt they first understood the world of art at the Joslyn. And also there were things happening outside the Joslyn, community events in the parking lot or other things. So we talked to as many people as we could. And we found out that, of course, the society in Omaha is more diverse than you might imagine. And there are different groups of people that were interested in, also members of the museum at some level or another. And that was the first part of our work. But the idea of landscape only came, in my mind as an architect, later, because I didn't understand it other than having visited Chimney Rock or Schoolhouse Rock. I'd visited all those places. Or school, what's it called? You know the one I'm talking about? The big rock that goes up and looks like a schoolhouse.
We should stick with Schoolhouse Rock.
What?
We should just stick with Schoolhouse
Schoolhouse Rock is a great name, yeah, so we'll call it that. But when we arrived, and Michelle, who's a landscape architect, started to look at the grounds specifically at the Joslyn, we started to understand things in a different way.
Yeah, I think one of the things about the way that we work and the way that we think is certainly, as Craig has said, is to talk to a lot of people and to listen and to ask a lot of questions. And I think we're, like probably all of you, just very curious people. When I first visited the Joslyn, I had been through Omaha many times, but I had never actually visited the museum. And I don't think I'd even met Jack yet. And Craig and I were walking around, looking around outside before we went in, and he said, what would you do? And I was like, I don't know. and it really took being patient and taking time and just watching and observing both the land and the grounds and how it was composed and the structure of the gardens around the existing museum was already there, but you could start to see some subtleties that gave clues to how to think about it. So that was really important, and that was really, in a way, kind of intimate and really looking very closely. We watched how people came to the museum, and we could probably talk all night about that because I get really obsessed about this, because it was difficult for understandable reasons for people to just sometimes find the door. And so we watched and we talked to people, and I can't see you out there. I don't know what exciting thing is happening in the back. And so we just watched how people were interacting from the moment that they arrived on the site and got out of their car, to then also how people moved through and experienced the museum. And then if you zoom out even further, pretty early on, Jack arranged for several of us to go see the Sandhill crane migration. And it was just an absolutely incredible, moving, awe-inspiring experience. And I imagine most of you have done that. But I think it also helped us to think about the larger region, the larger context, the bigness of this landscape that Omaha lives within and that Joslyn sits within. And we started to think about how can we at least embody or be inspired by that subtle yet very bold beauty of this place that we're in.
I think my answer is maybe less exciting. It's I took, I think, 3 taxis to the museum the first trip. Every taxi dropped me off in a different spot. Nobody knew where to go. First, they dropped me off by the dumpsters, and then I had to figure out where I was. And the next one dropped me off up the drive and sort of pulled all the way around through the parking and circled around. And I was like, this is weird because the buildings are just they're so iconic and they have such presence, and nobody knows where to go. Everybody had a different idea. I was looking at their maps on the car, and they were all doing different things. And I mean, it's like Google didn't know exactly where to drop you off. Sure. And so, I mean, that to me was like, there was a disconnect. You had this powerful place that over time had sort of become, or had lost its power in terms of how to navigate people and how people show up. And so, right away, I think I vaguely remember that first meeting we had back in the office afterwards, where I was kind of describing the experience. I said, the buildings are amazing, but nobody knows where to go. And so it just seemed to me like, okay, there's a big problem to solve here. We didn't have any answers. Nobody knew really what to do. This was actually before I think we really came on board. So we were just like scratching our heads for a little while about how to approach it.
Well, that kind of segues to the next topic, which is like just elaborating a little bit about the process and the decision to determine where should the building be located, where should the front door be. It's a 7-acre site, and we were pretty clear. We're like, there are really no preconceived ideas about where it should go and what it should look like. How did you make the decision to its location, the front door, and just thinking a little bit about that?
In the meantime, if you could go to slide 4, I think, rather than the plan. We could look at the plan, but that's sort of an overall view. It might help us understand. We don't have photographs of the building under construction, so you'll have to rely on these renderings until the big reveal that happens in a few weeks. But I think what's interesting to me is that because of we work so in such a close-knit way, landscape architects, interior architects, our local partners that are here tonight, trying to understand what to do. I'm almost certain that when you go there, you won't really remember all those problems that Aaron mentioned. You won't remember how hard it was to find the door. You won't remember how difficult it was to move through the gardens and find a place. You won't remember that there was this kind of acoustically problematic atrium where if you just breathed a little bit, it was magnified 100 times. So I think all those things will kind of disappear. But we very early understood that the buildings that existed were powerful. The iconic Joslyn itself, the expansion in the Scott Pavilion by a very well-regarded architect named Norman Foster from the United Kingdom. These things really, despite all the problems, they were amazing buildings, and they still are. And so how do we add to that sort of history? What is the next chapter in the Joslyn? Because the Joslyn has been around for, what is it, 90 some odd? 90 plus years, and it has another 90 plus years ahead of it. That's a huge trajectory. And we didn't want to copy. That was the first thing everyone said. Besides people saying, don't mess it up, the second thing was, is it going to be pink? And, it was a frightening question because we love the Joslyn building and we like the Scott Pavilion, and they're both pink. Are we going to make another Barbie house or something? And we love pink. I love pink. But the situation needed to transcend that discussion. And so these two buildings, which had the entrance set back, when you came in, in the wrong way off the, what is the street that's the one where we eliminated the entrance?
Oh, 24th.
24th. And you came in and then you saw the roundabout. You were like, am I supposed to go there? Like, it was bad enough walking, but it was even worse driving. And people didn't understand they could go there. And then the door was set back from the main facades of the two biggest buildings in this area. So you couldn't see where the door was. And clearly something had to happen there. We looked at many sites. We looked at where the Discovery Garden is. And by the way, everyone may think that that was an inevitable design, the one we came up with. It was not inevitable. We went through a lot of work, and we talked to a lot of people. But we thought perhaps it should be where the Discovery Garden is, right against the road and in the corner. Makes a lot of sense functionally, but it didn't make a lot of sense in terms of attitude. The attitude is important in a project like this. So we built it forward of the atrium. And we saw that if you pulled it forward, it would block the view of the Joslyn itself. So we bent it, it just curved, one of these great works of art that we saw in the Schrager collection that the new building would house. There was the Bryce Marden pieces that had those shapes. There were just a number, one of the Diebenkorn or Robert Morris. There were a few paintings that we looked at in the Schrager collection that inspired us, and it just pulled itself around. And it said, hi, this is where you enter. And that's how it started.
Well, and one of the outcomes of what Craig is describing that I really am so excited about is that we eliminated that driveway from 24th. And that seems kind of like a small thing in a way, and not everybody was on board right away. People were concerned, understandably, that you would be disoriented or you would drive to that area and not be able to find your way. And I think it will become intuitive and a habit quickly over time. But removing that access from 24th, that driveway that got to that drop-off area, did a lot of things. It meant that we could actually reconnect the Discovery Garden to the rest of the grounds, to the rest of the gardens, because we basically filled that in with new plantings and drifts and small, soft hills and pathways. Oh, yeah, good idea, thank you.
Could you go to slide 6, please?
So it allows, I think, the rest of the grounds and the gardens to now seamlessly connect to the Discovery Garden. And there's paths and there's ways to move through. In my opinion, that driveway was really close to the Foster Pavilion that you see just on the right of the image. It was just pushing right up against that building, and now it sits in a much softer, generous landscape. And that also allowed us to reorient so that when you do enter now from the north, I can't remember Davenport.
Davenport, which is now Faust Street.
It's been, okay. That when you drive, and when you turn off the street and enter to the site, that's the beginning of, I think, your experience at the Joslyn. It's not when you enter into the front door of the museum. It's when you arrive, you can find a place to park or someone can drop you off, and you begin to see how all of this stitches together. And I think we moved the building around a lot to try to figure out what that whole composition would be.
You could go to slide 8, if possible. This is the view from the new entrance. So the first thing you see is not just a work of art, but a work of art that's at a different horizon than your eyes. You look up at the art, and in different parts of the site, occasionally you look down, and occasionally straight at where you are. So all of those perspectives are important.
Well, and when you go to slide 9, you see that same space from inside the building. So you see how you'll enter into the lobby, and there's a sense of understanding where you are because you've seen that sculpture as you've arrived. And that porosity and that inside-outside connection was also something we were really interested in creating that sense that you could kind of move from the indoors to the outdoors. And if it's raining or just really cold, you can experience the outdoors by staying inside.
I think if you could go to slide 3, the site plan. The conversation makes me think about really how blank the slate was in the beginning. And even though this is the new site plan and all of the different things that you just heard about live in that site plan, everybody who we talked to in the beginning just said, well, you're putting the building north of the Scott Pavilion, right? And so we said, well, I mean, maybe. We didn't know. But if we do that, and we were having these conversations with people as well as ourselves, if we do that, what happens to the memorial building? Because if everybody comes north of the Scott building, you've got a building that's 2 buildings away, and how do they get there? And what do? Do we have to tunnel through one building to get to the other? And so pretty quickly, what we found was, if we set up the buildings in a series of 3, that one is going to always feel left out. Only 2 can interact at a time. But if we figure out a way to connect them all somehow equally, which is really how we came up with the layout that we did, then we can find a way to honor all 3 buildings at once, because there was too much power to ignore from the existing buildings, and it would just seem almost sacrilegious to not somehow feature all 3 at the same time. So really, in the end, the more we thought about it, the more we realized there really was only one good option, which was to find a spot in the middle that connects everything, and then the new building has to touch that somehow. And so it can't go too far away, so that sort of limited how far east it could go or north it could go. And then it really started to settle into a spot that made sense, and then we sort of went from there.
This is how designers spend their evenings, I guess.
So let's just talk a little bit. Maybe Aaron, we'll start with you this time. We'll just reverse the order. Let's talk a little bit about how the 3 buildings come together. The gentleman to my right once referred to it as the kiss, whether that's accurate or not, but maybe just talk a little bit about that moment where all 3 buildings come together, and we can hear a little bit on those thoughts.
Maybe it's more of a squeeze. So what Craig had mentioned before in terms of the front door being set so far back, in the beginning was a little bit of a challenge because that front door wasn't going to work anymore. So really, we brought the front door out to meet where we thought people were coming in, which is not that far from where people were coming in before, but you're just coming in a different direction now. But really, we talked about that point where the old doors used to be. That's really the kiss, or this moment where it's, if you think about a wheel and it has a hub and it has spokes that come out of the wheel. This was really the hub. It was the center of an arrangement of several buildings. And so if we could get people there pretty quickly, then we would feel like all 3 buildings really had a center of gravity that was equal. So we weren't biasing one building over another. Certainly not biasing the new building, although you do arrive there first because that's where the new front doors are. If you go to slide 5, you can see the interior view of this moment from the 2nd floor. And so from here, you see to the left is the Scott Pavilion. That's the 1990s, set of galleries. Very tall space. To the right, you see the doors that lead you into the memorial galleries. And then straight ahead, you have a path that leads you to the new galleries. So really, it's the center point of everything. And if you come in on the 1st floor, there's a center point that's similar, but you're not going straight to the galleries. But if you head right up the stairs, and you saw an image of the lobby a moment ago that shows the stairs that go up, we think it's pretty intuitive. You walk in the front door, and it's all there for you. It takes you up the stairs, and everything is really kind of anchored together.
And by the way, the actual space which we were in today is even better than the rendering. So I think you're going to be, hopefully pleased. The light coming through, the vistas that you get to the outside, even to the high school across the way, that's part of this ensemble. Quite nice.
I was also thinking, if we go back to slide 8, in case you think that we always all just immediately agree on things. That garden, right now we just call it the North Pocket Garden. Maybe, I don't know if it has a new name coming, but that elevated space that then we showed you can see from inside the lobby also, it went up and down and up and down and up and down, and we argued about how high and how low and what you put there.
We had a room underneath it for a while.
Had a room underneath it for a while.
Thank goodness we got rid of that.
Yes, I agree.
I just wanted to share that because I think we're all really excited about what we're seeing now as it's almost complete. So I was there today with my colleague Zainab, who's out in the audience here somewhere, placing boulders and trees, and the sculpture is there, and you see it from in the lobby. And we spent so much, what's it called, hand-wringing, trying to decide what that experience could be. And I'm so excited for you all to see it and to see that how it helps to hinge all of this together to make this connection between the three buildings.
And I want to just maybe follow up on that, Michelle. I mean, I'm a person who goes to a lot of art museums, and often it's hard to see daylight or to figure out where you are. And I think what's really unique about this project is this looking to the outside. We kind of focus our attention on the 3 acres, kind of the south of the property, but talk a little bit about the thought process behind creating those views from the entry level as well as the gallery level, and that sort of looking to the outside. And being outside and looking in as well.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that I think we were thinking about. One was really just that sense of.
I'm just going to ask to put it on slide 11.
Oh, thank you. The sense of, as you're exploring the museum, we've all, I think, had those experiences where you might become fatigued, or you're in the space and it's so much to take in. That moments where you can, your attention can shift, where you can have the long view out, or you can get that daylight, or even step outside. This is a garden that's just outside of the community room. It is meant to give you that sort of encourage you to take a pause and take a breath. Also, I think, as I might have said earlier, the grounds are incredible, and we're really excited that we've been able to really have the opportunity to think about what was there and the structure of the garden. But many of the sculptures and art pieces that are there are as much a part of visiting the Joslyn as what's inside the building. And so that porosity and that sense of invitation outside is really, hopefully, going to encourage people to understand that a little bit differently. But then there's also, for me, a third part of what I hope we've been able to do, which is, I imagine most of you have been to the Joslyn many, many times, but there are people that have never been, and hopefully there'll continue to always be new visitors. And we recognize that move alone can sometimes be intimidating. The buildings that were there, as we've said, were maybe sometimes a little difficult to find your way into. Many people that we spoke to early on described it as fortress-like, a little bit of a sense of keeping your distance. And so not only those gardens that are very intimate and close to the buildings are meant to kind of break down that barrier, but also, as you've probably seen, we've lowered that perimeter wall so that you can see into the grounds and to the buildings. I think.
Yeah, let's see. It's slide 10, I think.
You can see into the space a little bit more. We hope that creates a sense of invitation. Just maybe even someone that has driven by 1,000 times and maybe has never stopped to be curious and find their way in. And maybe your first visit, you don't even go into the museum. Maybe you attend an event that the museum organizes on the lawn, or you wander around and see the sculptures. And that begins to also reduce those barriers or those perceived disconnects.
You know, one of the great things about working with Jack and everyone at the Joslyn was that as much as we all love the existing buildings, they did represent a historically retroactive understanding of art museums, which is essentially an art museum is a storehouse for art, a protector of art, a thing that you felt that the art was inside and couldn't be touched in any way. And this is the way museums had been for 60 years probably. They're mausoleums almost for art. And so as much as they're wonderful, they're also kind of frightening. And the future of museums is more tied to recognizing that art is everywhere. It's not just inside the building itself. It's a part of our lives, and some of us have art in our homes, whatever type of art it might be. And so the landscape became the bridge between the historic understanding of what a museum was and the understanding of the future that the Joslyn will have as the society around us changes in its attraction to art. Because people need to connect to art, and they're not always comfortable doing that. And the best way to do that is to open it up to the rest of the world, break down the doors.
Let's talk a little bit about the art, and let's talk a little about Aaron and Craig about the design of the galleries. Inspiration, the use of light, natural light, skylights, scale, materials, sort of the thought process and what people can expect to see that is different from other galleries in the building.
I think you should take that, Aaron, and I'll just say go to slide 7. That's my big thing.
I think there are things that we started out knowing when we began the project, and there's things that we learned together. I think what we started out knowing that you wanted, Jack, you and the team, was you wanted to open up the place to do a lot of the things that we just talked about, to have an experience that was more inside-outside, to not be hermetic, to not treat spaces like vaults, to have some kind of counterpoint to the vaults, which is why there's more natural light and more glass. When you walk in, you're looking at sculptures inside and outside at the same time, all the time, really, until you go deep into the galleries. So we knew that from the beginning. What we did together that I thought was really helpful is we did go around and tour museums together, because that helps us establish a kind of vocabulary that becomes common to the group. What do you like about this gallery? Are those ceilings too tall? Look at those lights. Why are the lights so visible in the space? Like, oh, look the way they hung that piece of art. Look at how the lobby is right next to the gallery, and it's so loud in the gallery. I mean, we had all those conversations. I think we must have gone to, 6, 7, 8 museums together. And we'd also gone to the museum that we had kind of finished just prior to this in SF MoMA. We did another expansion there. And so when we did that, we came back with a catalog of things that we knew were working really well. Sometimes we all were aligned on those opinions. Sometimes everybody had a different thought about it. But we did have some things that we felt good about. We knew kind of where the ceiling heights wanted to be. We knew that certain galleries had a kind of a lighting effect that was really special and was really let the art stand out. I mean, that's often how we treat that's our approach to art galleries, is we want to make something special. And certainly there's architecture there. But we don't want the architecture to be the thing you look at when you walk in the room. We want the art to be the thing that brings you in the room and makes you stay there. And then once you're there for a little while, you can start looking around and wondering, why does the art feel better in this room? And the answers to that could be many, but I think in the case of this kind of room, or maybe some of the rooms that we've done in SF MoMA, we try to create an approach to the ceiling where we're not using these kind of light cannons all over the place that are actually just pumping light down on the floor and on the ceiling. We're trying to let the ceiling be something softer, something that just kind of lights the room in we call it just indirect lighting. It's essentially lighting upwards and downwards at the same time, so that you really only need a few cans of light in the room just to hit those specific artworks. So the room feels very quiet. It lets you focus more on the artwork. And what was I think a really cool evolution for the Joslyn that goes beyond what we could have done in SF MoMA which was like a tower. It was a stack of 7, 8 floors of museums. So there's only so much we could do with the ceilings there. Here we had access to the roof. And so, I mean, what you see here are these sculpted ceilings, but above the sculpted ceilings is a space that allows skylights to actually just fill a space above that you can't see with daylight. And in that space, it's like a light chamber. And there are some artificial lights in there too. So if the day is really cloudy, you can turn those on and increase the light levels of the room. But mostly, if there's a sunny day out or even a bright indirect day, the room fills up with daylight. And it doesn't, you know it intuitively because of the color of the light and it's very soft. But you don't see the light coming in because it's all happening above your head. But that daylight lights the floor very softly, creates a baseline in the room, and then it lets these few, like devices that we have to kind of plug into the ceiling do that remaining work to just light the art and honor it.
It's incredibly complex, the ceiling, and one of the things that I like to say in our studio is that an architect's best sort of proposal is to make complicated things seem simple. If you can make something really complicated sort of seem straightforward, that's a gift. And so we worked very hard on that, and Aaron has only sort of given you a small taste of how that ceiling works, but it's incredibly complicated. It's very three-dimensional. But the other thing I wanted to add very quickly was I've been, as I mentioned earlier, to the Joslyn in all stages of its life. So not in the 1930s, but I was there in the 1980s. And I saw it before the Scott Pavilion was made. I went back when the Scott Pavilion was made, and now I'm back with the new Snøhetta expansion. And so one of the things that I always loved about the Joslyn was, first of all, the original building is amazing. You just can't help but love it, and the galleries are kind of old-fashioned, which makes them wonderful for certain types of art. And then when the Scott Pavilion was made, it became modern. And you went back and forth between those two, and there was this amazing juxtaposition of what a gallery could be in the past and in the future. How do you make a different kind of gallery other than those two that exist? And we knew intuitively that it had to be something different. We couldn't copy the original memorial building. We couldn't copy the heights and grandeur of the Foster building. We had to think of something else so that you had all three. It was a triptych of experiences. And the new building, the new galleries, and you really can't, this perspective doesn't really do justice to the space. They feel so intimate, so close. When you're there, you just feel like you're just surrounded by these works of art, much more so than the previous two buildings. So I think you're going to feel that. And earlier there was this discussion of the kiss. I guess I said that because of the Klimt painting or the Rodin sculpture called The Kiss. But since it's three things involved here, I'm not sure what kind of kiss that is. Some kind of a menage a trois or something like that. But it's definitely a three-person tango that's happening.
It's a snuggle.
A snuggle, yeah.
So let's move from the inside to the outside, and the facade, the material, its design, and relationships to the 31 building, to the 94 building. Because it's not pink marble. Let's just talk a little bit about what some of the thought processes were there.
A couple things, right? We talked about the pink marble. That was obviously a big question we got early on, and we kind of came maybe not full circle, 3/4 of a circle around on it. Came full circle. Really said no to everybody on that, and in the end, it's a little bit pink. Like I'm not gonna lie, it's got some pinkness to it, which I can get into in the but stepping back from the color for a second, the character of the facade and the massing had a couple of sort of tricks that we were trying to somehow pull off, like things that didn't seem to fit together right away, and we had to figure out how do we get from A to B to make this thing that we're trying to make. So the first is that the building really plugs into the central axis of all of the existing buildings, and the existing artwork, the beautiful sort of like snaking river artwork is a part of that axis and lives on the ground floor, and we wanted to make that a part of everything. But essentially, we were tying into the glass atrium, which is a big, tall space, but fundamentally it's a big, open, clear space, like a winter garden. It's made to feel sort of like it's outdoors. And at the end of that sequence, we're trying to create a massing that gets you to these galleries, which of course have daylight and skylights that we talked about, but actually the spaces themselves don't have windows in them, so it's really more of a solid box that has daylight kind of flowing through it, but it doesn't let you sort of look in and out once you get to the end of the gallery. So how to create a transition from the atrium, the very clear glass atrium, all the way around to this more solid moment that it's just kind of a quiet, opaque art experience. And then at the same time, we wanted the building, as it gets to that right side of the image, to be taller and have a certain presence on the north side of the building. We wanted to squeeze it down on the south side of the building so that when you look from Dodge, you can see all the buildings together, because otherwise one would block another one. And so we were trying to figure out how to get this horizontal glass skylights to meet this more vertical solid facade. And we just played around with that enough to the point where we said, well, why don't we just sort of twist it? What if we can get from horizontal and clear to vertical and opaque? And what would it look like if we sort of created a gradual transition, which really started that process of trying to figure out how the massing came together. It started the process of thinking about the cladding. We wanted it to feel stone-like, but it's not stone. And in the end, where we got to was a precast panel that has stone granularity to it. And so it has aggregate in the mix that is essentially the pink marble itself. And it's ground down.
Just to explain, if you're not aware of the technology, what you're seeing is created by humans, so it's mixed. And we took some of the pink that exists in the stone and put it into the mix. So it's there, but it's not actual stone. It's a piece of the living stone in something that was created.
It's a little like concrete or terrazzo, where you see a big smooth surface and you see all the little rocks in it. And so we worked a long time with the fabricators to see how big can these stones get. I mean, originally we were looking at really big honkin' pieces of pink stone, and it was really provocative and cool. And they got smaller as we sort of worked through the process of prototyping them. But what's interesting about them getting smaller is that they sort of diffused into the color of the panel more. And so now when you get there, and this is the thing that we were just fingers crossed, praying that you didn't have a way of knowing if the thing that we were making off-site was going to fit well with the stuff that was living on-site. We could keep bringing samples back and forth, but it's not easy to do when you have a little piece and you bring it back and you're holding it in front of the building and somebody's standing 50 feet away and they're like, does it look good? And you're like, I don't know, and they put it over here in the shadow. And there's a lot, you're blindfolded a little bit half the time. And then when the panel started showing up, and we were worried because the little aggregates got very small the further we had to prototype these panels. They ended up really doing exactly what we wanted them to do, which was it created just kind of a hue. So the panels aren't pink, but they definitely have a pinkish hue to them. Yeah. And they're it's a very complementary color.
I just add one more thing to conclude. Aaron's talking about this twist from horizontal to vertical. And there's an idea that the building was somewhat conceived around, which I will tell you so that you can see it in this image. Although if I didn't tell you, you might feel it anyway. You just wouldn't know the specifics. And that was that we had examined the character, like the memorial building of the Joslyn, which almost to me felt like Chimney Rock or something. It just emerged from the earth. It was a part of the earth. The Joslyn is not separate from the place it sits on. It's part of it. And then the Scott Pavilion, which was made by Norman Foster, is not exactly the same. It sits on it. So you can feel the ground, and then you drop this block on it. So instead of growing up from the earth, it was dropped on it. And our expression is lifted up in the air, floating across the ground. So it's an intermediary between those two ways of thinking. And for me, that was intriguing, having spent time in Nebraska, when you experience these amazing storms, which you just recently had here, as we can see the dead trees everywhere. It's frightening, actually. But there's when the clouds push across the Nebraska landscape across the prairies, across the American continent, really. You feel those clouds, and they spin, and they're filled with energy. And I think when you look at the facade here, that twist is also seen as a meteorological phenomena, which you don't have to know that, but you might feel it. And if those of you that live here and understand that, you'll sense it, I think, rather directly.
Let's talk a little bit, Aaron was talking about material. Let's talk about the material that we might find out in the landscape, Michelle. Think about the planting, these kinds of things. Share with all of us.
Sure. Well, like I said, when we first visited and began coming...
Can we go to 10? Slide 10, that was one we had up earlier. 10, there, that one.
That's a good one.
That's a good one.
We'll do 10 and then we'll go to 4 in a minute. But when we first visited, and I think we try to do this with all of the projects that we're involved with, all the places where we're working, is, as I said earlier, we try to really observe and look really carefully at what's already there. And we didn't feel that it was necessary or wise or even important to wipe this slate clean. And in fact, as we looked at the grounds around the museum, there's a lot that was really quite powerful. There's a structure to the gardens that was, at the time, mostly created by walkways and walls. We've kept the water wall that you probably are familiar with. Although we've modified the perimeter wall a little bit, it's still there in essence. What we started to notice is that generally the sculptures and the plantings around the grounds were kind of placed into a somewhat flat landscape. For the most part, I'm going to come back to flatness later. For the most part, especially in front of the memorial building, in front of the grand stairs, things were kind of distributed somewhat equally, and there were some beautiful plants, and the plant material is in fact a lot what we captured and added to. But if you look at, say, the Discovery Garden, you see a very different approach to the plantings. And so we started to think about, not dissimilar to what Craig just described about the building and how the buildings meet the ground or float above the ground, the bigness of the Nebraska landscape, the sandhills prairie, the subtle, beautiful rolling hills, the carved river valleys. If you zoom out a little bit, this is a big, complex landscape. It's composed of lots of different textures and plants and characteristics, but it reads cohesive. And so we were looking for a sense of cohesiveness that could reconnect all of the grounds so that when you visit in the future, you don't think, well, over there is the Discovery Garden, over here is the parking, there's some sculpture over there. So as we thought about the planting approach, we really looked to a palette of plants that is native or naturalized to the area. Again, much of that was already on site, although there was a lot more lawn than I think we have now. But we wanted to just draw from that and really bolster it. So the plants that you'll see are the plants that are familiar to this region, yet we've composed them so it's more of drifts. It's more about plants that have a complexity and layering and weaving together like you see in the foreground here. And that there can be places within these bigger drifts where you could carve out a space for a sculpture, or you could have a unique planting like the arborvitae that you'll see from the top of the stairs of the memorial building as you look out into the landscape. And we also wanted to really think across all seasons. So we showed you an image earlier of a winter view, the idea that you could have interest and variety by composing a plant palette where you'll have that seasonality, you'll have a lot of textures, a lot of colors that emerge at different times of year. Hopefully when you come back multiple times to visit over the year, you'll see something very different in this landscape. And I think maybe where I'll end for the moment is we also introduced a lot of changes to the ground plane itself. So it was perceived as very, very flat. And in the garden that you see here, for example, we introduced smaller hills, these kind of rolling hills that are meant to draw from that larger region. What that does is it also places you as a visitor in a different relationship to the plants and to the ground and to the sculptures. So there'll be places where you see through and your view is framed. There'll be places where you might be looking down or looking up at the vegetation, that you are kind of embraced by it rather than just looking out across it. And maybe I'll come back later and talk about the lawn, because everyone wants to hear about that.
I think we're going to kind of move into the last question, which is going to be a little bit open-ended, so we can have some questions from the audience. And it's just final thoughts, like what are your hopes for this project? You know, maybe your biggest sense of accomplishment, favorite aspect, what have you learned? What's the last thing you might want to share with the audiences? And then we'll open it up for questions. I'll start with you, Craig.
Okay, thanks. Can we go to slide 9, please? What I'm hopeful for is that the history of this particular art museum is intriguing. It started off with an open-minded, wonderful woman who wanted to extend the world of art into the community that she was a part of. And she built something that she knew people would enjoy on different levels. But as much as she wanted that, it was still a kind of Xanadu sort of thing that it was over there. And maybe you ended up there if you were of one kind of audience. As it expanded with the Scott Pavilion, it became more of a serious art museum about new and contemporary works, changing works in relation to the categorical historical works. And now with its new generation, for me, I'm hopeful that all those ways of seeing the past of art will be broken down, and everyone that goes there will meet a stranger. If every person that visits this museum meets someone that they didn't expect to meet, surrounded by a world of art that inspired them, to me that would be the success of this museum, that it's a social catalyst as much as it is a collection of amazing works of art. And that can only happen, I think, in the world where landscape, where the grounds, where the gardens, all of these things open the door first, and then as you move inside, you see these vast expanses of daylight where you experience art in different perspectives. You have the horizontal, as you see here, lifting the building up, a horizontal lobby, meeting a verticality of sort of spatial understanding. Your brain is going up and your body's moving side to side, and that makes a difference in how you feel comfortable around others. So that's, I guess, my world.
Well, I hope that this has been such an amazing experience, and I think one aspect that I take away is really, it's really helped me to really focus on quietness and subtlety and see the beauty in that and try to bring that beauty forward. Not dissimilar to what Craig is saying, I hope that all of you and people that aren't here tonight, I hope that you come to the museum and you spend hours in a gallery or the galleries looking at art. I hope you come back to take a class or attend an event, whether that's inside or outside. And I hope that you come just to see what's blooming in the garden, or to sit and visit with a friend, or to have a coffee. I hope that part of the future of the Joslyn is to just be a part of everyday life, and that would make me really, really happy. But I have something else that I've been obsessed with since the beginning, and I just can't not share it. I stood at the top of the stairs with Craig, as on that first visit, thinking about what we might want to do. And one of the things that I noticed is that the lawn as you looked out from the grand stairs. Actually, if we go to 4, you might see it somewhat. But as you looked out, the memorial building is so proud and sturdy.
Maybe
and,
slide 4, yeah, that's the one.
It has such a presence. And then we stood up there and we looked out, and I noticed that the ground, the lawn, and I just have to do this. It just was sagging. It didn't have the same stature, and it just kind of tilted off towards Dodge Street. And once I saw it, I could never unsee that. And it sounds kind of silly, but at the same time, I think that our bodies feel those things. And what we wanted to do, and one of the things that we've worked to change, and so we've given the lawn that is there today a frame, and we leveled it out, and we nestled it within these soft rolling gardens and areas for sculpture. But part of the idea was for it to feel solid, for it to feel good, so that when you stand out there as someone walking through, you don't feel like you're just tipping over a little bit. And I think that our bodies experience places as much as our minds, and so I wanted to share that.
I think, if I have one big hope for how everybody experiences it beyond enjoyment, beyond surprise, because I hope that people, when they walk in, and even the moment you sort of drive onto the site, that you're surprised, is that I think that you'll hopefully experience that everything that's new on the site was probably created in a way that makes you appreciate what you already had. Everything really is meant for you not to notice the new thing always right away. It's there so that it frames something that was there previously. So a view, the first view you get when you arrive at the museum, when you drive through the gates now, is not really the new building. It's actually a garden and an artwork that's right on axis as you drive in. And so what we've tried to do is use new things and sort of push them to the side a little bit so that you also notice the existing buildings, the existing site. You notice how the Discovery Garden is now reconnected to the rest of the site. And so I think, if I could have one thing that comes true, it's that everybody feels that we only used these new things on site to actually frame and honor all of the old things on site.
That's a great way to end. Thank you. We're going to take questions from all of you, and I believe that someone is on their way up here to grab a microphone, and we will go from there. We'll have to take a few minutes for questions.
We can go to slide 13, which is like some kind of a thank you slide. Oh. And the answer to every question is the color blue.
I love it. My first question is, can you still enter by walking up those gorgeous pink stairs?
Yes.
And then related to that is, will there be information for new visitors in both the north entrance and then the stairway entrance?
Yes. So you can always go in and out through the north stairs.
Perfect.
And we hope that one day we live in a place where more people walk to the Joslyn.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the orbit route and the streetcar and things like that. I think that makes total sense. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Lots of questions.
First of all, I lived for many years in San Francisco, and now I split my time between New York and here. I'm such a fangirl of your work. I'm so excited to be here and hear you speak about it in person. So many questions, but here, I'll just keep it to one. The thing I love about the Whitney and the SF MoMA is that they've created these beautiful public spaces where people gather in front of the payroll wall. And Omaha is almost bereft of that, particularly indoors. We have a great new park, but indoor, we're really at a loss for great indoor public spaces for free. And I wondered if that was part of your program. Is there a way for us to gather out of the snow in the new museum without paying?
Well, program is a complicated word, so there are different ways to define that. Some of that has to do with just simple things like how big is it? How many square feet is it? So yes, it existed in a program as a number of square feet and a number of definitions of to what it's supposed to do. However, the vision for that came from a collective understanding. Everyone knew they wanted to welcome more diverse audiences. As I mentioned earlier, a feeling that you could be around strangers and still feel good, or be alone and feel good around many other people. Because it's hard to get that feeling of being alone together. And you should feel that in an art museum, especially when you have an existential experience of some variety, which is most approachable in an art museum. It's hard to have an existential experience in the third row of the grocery store or something like that, although I have had such things. But in an art museum, it is maybe more tenable. So the program for the lobby that you saw earlier was built amongst everyone's feeling that the Joslyn needed to be welcoming. And so that made for that lofty space and for the spaces in the landscape. Because, to be honest, you didn't need to change the landscape. You didn't. I mean, no, it's true. No, it's totally true. It worked, it was there, it was fine. But everyone knew that that wasn't good enough. It needed something more. There was sculpture there. You could walk around. There was stuff over there, and there was that feeling in the beginning that, well, we already got it. And so what we did was we said, well, yeah, you've got something, and this is an expression I like to say a lot, is it's better to want what you get than get what you want. And so we were looking at how we could take the landscape and really build it into a new territory, because it's not good enough just to be happy with what you got.
And I just want to add, I think about inside space, that there's been an attempt to create a new cafe experience, a place for people to just sit down and plug in their laptop, or a place for people to gather. And even just thinking about seating, the seating that has increased. Snøhetta has designed these beautiful new benches for the galleries. There are places that are soft seating, in the lobby. So I think there are those more spaces for people to gather, both inside and out. Next question.
I have two questions. The first is, when you take the new entrance and you go up the stairs, which gallery will you enter?
You have a 3-sided coin. You throw it up in the air. So when you walk up the stairs, you are taken to the bridge that had always been there between the Memorial Building and the Scott Pavilion. And the first thing that you will see is that choice. Behind you is the new wing and the new collections. And so you'll be there bathed in light coming not just from above, as the way it was previously, but light from the side, from different directions. And so you'll turn and you'll see a view to the exterior gardens. You'll see a view into the new galleries. And it's up to you to make that choice. And I think importantly, though, whatever choice you make, it will be easy to find the next place you want to go. Because the spaces in between the galleries are like palate cleansers. You're able to experience this, take a break, then you go to that one, you experience that, take a break, and go into the third, experience that, and then you take a break, and then you go outside, or maybe you started outside. Each one has a different kind of refreshing space between experiences.
That sounds fantastic.
Great.
All right. Question number 2 is, the people that, when Norman Foster Building was built, were in love with the Chihuly sculpture. Where did it go?
So it will have another home in Omaha. I cannot say where yet. And then the other Chihuly is back where it was by the cafe.
All All right.
Next question.
Woohoo.
Thank you.
Gosh, there's one over here that seemed to be waiting, and then there's one in the back there.
Thank you for being here today. My question is, I hear you saying bring the outside in and the inside out, and I can't help but think of Frank Lloyd Wright, who had a signature hat, who Craig has a signature hat. Is the ghost of Frank Lloyd Wright and some of his designs always haunting architects, or do you totally ignore him?
Well, actually, it's funny you asked that, because recently we had an interview with an art journal, an international art journal, and they said, "Is this Prairie School?" You know, I'm like, wow, I didn't even know you knew what that was. But it was intriguing, because my first response is no, because we're not. That's a trajectory of architecture that was from the past that we're not exactly dealing with. On the other hand, yes, I think the answer must be yes, because there are characteristics of the prairie, and probably Michelle understands them better than the rest of us, because this is where she grew up. But there is this sort of feeling that things move in this direction. And at the same time, although things are moving like this and the horizon is like that, the sky is just this kind of huge thing. And I think we did an interesting translation of that type of thinking to build in daylight and brightness and openness to what Prairie School traditionally is more enclosed, that came from the sod houses of the prairies, when the first people, not only colonial people, but also the Native American, the tribal nations, built sod buildings which were protecting them from these incredibly difficult winds. But we've kind of opened it up and made it brighter and lighter.
Another question. I think right there in the middle I see.
There's two, yeah.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. Thank you. You mentioned very early on about the acoustics of the cafe area, I believe.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
The
that.
cafe area.
Oh,
has
thank you
that
for
been
asking.
amended or moved so that it's a more accessible space for people to connect?
How bizarre, because this was in my head the second you took the... Somebody asked about the cafe. You want to talk about it?
So the cafe is in the same location that it was. We couldn't move everything around. But what we did do was we looked at ways that we could just sort of refresh the experience. So, in some cases, refreshing it is redesigning it or moving it or, making it bigger. In other cases, there's something that was already there that just hadn't been untapped, or that was untapped. And so what we realized was there was a little room that was kind of in the back of the cafe area. So when you walked in the cafe, it was dark, certainly no daylight. But getting rid of the room, we had a facade to work with, and we just put a huge window in the back of the cafe. And so now when you come down the previous grand stair, so now you have two grand stairs. One really is going to take you up most of the time, and one is going to take you down most of the time. The existing grand stair is the one that most likely people are going to come down more than they go up. And you walk right down into the cafe, and now you have not just a small room where you kind of you have to squeeze your way in and get some food and it's dark, but you have daylight. You have a view to now a new garden that's beyond. So that whole area outside of the existing atrium has a garden space around it now that you can walk outside and sit down, and there'll be tables and chairs that'll be part of the experience. On all of the glass, actually, through the atrium, has all been replaced with sort of a much more modern, clear, higher performing glass that it just changes the whole nature of that entire experience. So where you sit and eat is the same atrium that you sat and ate before, but quite a lot has changed. The furniture is different, the daylight is different, the experience in the cafe, in the sort of server area is much different. There's now a coffee bar and all sorts of neat little things in there. But it has a lot of what it had before, because it still was a space that had all of that beautiful granite in it. So we had to pick and choose what we could do. So we found ways to insert some new wood materials in there. But really, the big hero is opening it up and putting a big window in there. And so I think
we moved the gift shop, so that'll be up to you to determine whether you like it. But I think it's wonderful. I mean, I loved the gift shop before. First of all, just because it was a great gift shop, but also it was in a good location. But we've moved it to nearer to the door of the new pavilion, new expansion, and it's surrounded with light. So you have daylight coming into the gift shop. There's one back there, I think.
Thank you all for being here tonight. I think you kind of downplayed how magnificent the building is, and your idea that it brings together possibility and peace really resonated. Actually brought a literal tear to my eye, so thank you for articulating it in that way. My question is a bit more technical. There are some incredible feats of engineering that went into this building, from the staircase to the cantilever to the north to the twist. Can you select one or more of those and give a little insight into how, I said magnificent before, but how truly magnificent it is that these came to life?
Well, our engineer should have been up here to talk about that. But there is one thing you'll notice. Some of the feats of engineering are actually simpler than they may appear at first glance. So things that there's great expanses that don't seem to have any columns, and you wonder, how can that stand up? There's nothing holding it up. If you look very, very closely when you're in the space, you'll see there are these tiny little rods. I don't know, what are they, 2 inches in diameter maybe? These very thin rods. And so the floor that looks like it's unsupported is being hung from the roof above. But you wouldn't notice that unless you look. So it's a kind of a little trick, a sort of magic trick to make everything seem like it's elevated, although it's actually suspended. So it's more like a mobile or something.
that's a good one. You took mine. I talked a little bit about the lighting in the gallery ceilings. That's just kind of a personal favorite because it's really about, it's really about shaping something that's ephemeral. We're trying to kind of sculpt the light and figure out a way to shape that light as it comes down into the room. I will say that just to maybe expand on what Craig said is that, we had to build out a structure that was a little heavier duty on top of the building to make it float. So whether we hung the floor from above, which you can see and you'll notice in the lobby, or whether we created that really big overhang, which there were a lot of discussions about, do we save a little bit of money by, sticking a column in that corner? And I think by not doing that, it creates a generosity of space and of cover that you feel immediately when you come. And I think it's one of the ways that you're greeted really quickly with just openness and welcome. And so I think, to me, that engineering, I think you will feel the results of that more than you will notice the sort of technical, any technical aspect.
Let's have one more question. I think, yeah, you pick. You're the woman with the mic.
Sorry, one back
Okay.
there.
Just really quick, I think I agree with you. I think it's a magnificent building. I think what you've done is really nice. I like the idea of the past, the present, and the future. I guess the question I have is a little bit, what in your design sense and what you've done kind of speaks towards that technology and the future of where things are going?
The future. We try not to think too much about what we don't know. And the future is one of those abstract worlds. In a way, the future is just as abstract as the past. There are two things that you'll never be able to touch. The only thing you can really touch is the present. So whatever we do, we want to make sure that the present in time is the most powerful moment, and that you're not projecting into the abstract in one direction or the other. However, that being said, as we mentioned earlier, museums are more open and trying to be more open now, more inviting, not mausoleums for art, not these great protectors for the wealthy to only experience. There are things where people who may not have had access to these types of art that you see in the building can now experience and enjoy them. So I suppose the future would be making the present more powerful.
I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I want to thank our speakers. I want to put in a plug for Michelle. We'll be here in November for a lecture lunch, and I don't know that date, but it will be on our website, so you'll have it. That's an opportunity for a more in-depth look at the landscape, and that will be in November. But please join me in thanking our speakers tonight. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.